Eiichiro Oda loves to hide things in plain sight. Examples range from high in the skies, the skull's right eye, to the depths of the ocean with the true identity of Poseidon, and all that is in between and above. From the earliest chapters of the series, Oda has loved to dangle things right in front of us and either shroud them in disguise of something else, or not reveal the whole truth. Hello humans of the world, I'm Dawn of the World, and today I'll be shining a light on this here old skull dome that we've been staring at for the better part of the last 2 years. Warning, if you are not caught up to date with the manga or you only follow the anime, there are spoilers for very recent events in the manga, that being chapter 1040. To be clear, Onigashima is the island itself, and the skull dome is, well, the skull dome. The most prominent feature of the island, which totally transforms the island skyline from something mundane into something fantastic. Now, while the skull dome is by and large considered a part of the island's geography, it is a lot more likely than not to be a literal skull bone that was once somebody's head rather than a funky shaped rock. Specifically, it seems to be the skull of someone who was an ancient giant, signifying that they have been dead for quite a while. And I've seen surprisingly little discussion about this, which is bizarre to me because it seems kind of significant. Surely this was somebody significant. There hasn't been a whole lot of contemplation over who or what this giant skull used to be, in favor of discussing other intriguing topics such as the mysteries of JoyBoy and who the lurking legend in Wano might be. But what if I were to tell you that the lurking legend, that JoyBoy, that the skull dome were one and the same? After pondering the identity of the skull on the back burner for the past several chapters, when Zunisha rocked up in chapter 1038, I pondered that perhaps this skull and the body that it belonged to probably knew Zunisha, because Zunisha is 1000 years old and all old people know each other. And now chapter 1040 has left us with a massive reveal. Zunisha was the companion of none other than JoyBoy. Now, wouldn't it kind of make logical sense for someone as massive as Zunisha to have a proportionally huge companion? A regular giant is still too small, but an ancient giant who was massive enough to have a whole palace built inside their skull would probably be a similar size next to Zunisha as, say, a regular person next to a regular elephant. Yes, there is not a lot of information indicating that JoyBoy was an ancient giant, but there's just not a lot of information about him in general, given the world government have tried to erase both him and everything attached to him from existence. Hence, a lot of these kinds of videos, my own inclusive, can feel a little bit like reaches as we try to make sense of it all. However, this ancient giant skull here could further explain why Zunisha has shown up in Onigashima at all. For one thing, yes, a legendary, era-defining battle is taking place and the FOMO is real. But for another, there's something so narratively sound about Zunisha returning to their long-lost companion at such a significant time, such as the lead up to the dawn of the world, not me, the one foretold by JoyBoy himself all those years ago. In the case that this is JoyBoy, I think that Kaido is aware of the fact, he knows. Before I go into the fact as to why, I want to briefly explain that I've kind of hurriedly put this together post chapter 1040, so it's all a bit of a mess, but there you go. Also, I haven't really thoroughly scoured the internet enough to see if anybody else has thought of this theory or of a similar theory, so if you know anybody else who's thought of this theory too, give them a shout out down below. I would love to see what they have to say on the topic. We do go to some pretty far out places in this video, and I do kind of veer into the territory of theorizing about ancient giants and the only race at some point, but it all comes back to this big bad boy being JoyBoy, so just hang tight. So let's discuss both Kaido and JoyBoy individually briefly and what we do know. JoyBoy was someone significant from the Void Century and as such has been widely erased from history. JoyBoy also made a promise of some sort to the mermaid princess of the time, a promise he was unfortunately unable to fulfill, for which he left an apology and said that somebody would come along one day and fulfill that promise. That's some inherited will right there. He also played a key role in leaving the One Piece on Laugh Tale, awaiting that promised day far in the future when the one who would rise up and inherit his will would find it. Because it seems as though JoyBoy is somebody who will return via reincarnation. In the grand scheme of things, Roger was essentially just the messenger. Also, one of JoyBoy's friends is a criminal elephant. Behold, a criminal. Like in chapter 821, we learn that Zunisha committed some kind of crime, and then we see the skull dome. It's almost as though this criminal's companion is hiding in plain sight. Brief, but effective. Now let's turn our attention from JoyBoy to Sad Boy. Let's take a look at what we know about Kaido. In true Wano being like an extreme mirror to Thriller Bark fashion, Kaido, like Moria, was someone who seemed to once have been filled with life, with hope and ambition, but has been jaded by the world and has in many ways become like a shadow of his former self. In chapter 1013, he says to a falling Luffy, "It seems like you couldn't have been JoyBoy either," almost seeming disappointed. We now understand that the either was in reference to himself, meaning meaning that for some time in his life, Kaido believed himself to be JoyBoy, the one who would inherit the will of or be the reincarnation of the past JoyBoy. And then sometime between he and Aba/King meeting and escaping Punk Hazard together and the present day, Kaido lost this belief in himself and instead realized he was a sad boy. Now it almost seems as though Kaido being JoyBoy was the ideal of a younger King/Aba who kind of applied this to him, and Kaido was like, hey, whatever you say. But let's take a closer look at Kaido's name, because this is something naturally overlooked by non-Japanese fans, and that is that Kaido can be closely read to mean JoyBoy, or something close to. Close enough that I don't think this has been done by mistake, meaning that when Kaido was born, Mr. and Mrs. Kaido, or whoever named him, likely held this belief too and gave him this name believing that maybe he'd grow into it, so to speak. Important to note is that Kaido is not human, he's an Oni, meaning that his parents were of the Oni race as well, and also that they/whoever named him knew about JoyBoy, which is not exactly common since JoyBoy is someone who has been mostly erased from history. So why did Kaido pick Wano, and why specifically Onigashima as his base? Kaido himself has said that Wano is special, and in chapter 1040, as she is falling to her defeat, Big Mom has confirmed that there is a major key to the One Piece right here in Wano. So Wano's ties to the One Piece are likely the reason that Kaido says it's special. So what lore do we have surrounding Onigashima? Well, to be honest, there is not a lot. In fact, it's suspiciously vacant of history and lore, because possibly the main subject has been erased from history. This currently nameless skull is part of the mountain range, which has been there for a long time and is now part of the landscape. It wouldn't be the first time One Piece has done this either. Think back to Little Garden, which, fun side note, is the arc that introduced us to the giants, as well as the idea that Elbaf is out there somewhere. The mountains that characterized Little Garden's skyline were the remains of Sea Kings, or for another sort of example, Shandora in a sense, which back in the day was literally an island shaped like a skull. In the scenario the Skull Dome is JoyBoy, I believe that Kaido is aware of this fact. Perhaps Oni and ancient giants, given their similar features, could be from the same or a similar place. In the event this skull is that of JoyBoy, and regardless of that fact, Wano is most likely where he perished. So Kaido, younger and full of the notion that he was JoyBoy, held this location, the death site of the last JoyBoy, in an almost sacred regard. Kind of going with the idea that where one JoyBoy's journey ended, the next would begin. Some real inherited will logic was going on right here. So we have it confirmed that there is a massive key to the One Piece laying in Wano. Post-Wano arc is gonna spill some major tea, and given Oda's aforementioned love for hiding things in plain sight, wouldn't it be neat if the major key to One Piece in Wano that Big Mom was monologuing about was literally on the place where she was just standing? If this major key / part / clue towards the One Piece was the head of JoyBoy himself. So like, where the body at? Even if this isn't JoyBoy and this is just some random ancient giant, where's the body? Maybe there are several other parts of the body scattered throughout the world, and Laugh Tale is the place where he must be assembled into one piece. We can rebuild him better, stronger. On the topic of ancient giants, let's not forget that we were introduced to them back in Thriller Bark, which Wano has not stopped mirroring. We got the Sad Boy Antags, we got the Zoro flirting with death, we got Ryuma, we got the smoke, the mirrors, the shadows, we got a big lonely dude and some long lost skeleton companion. The point that I'm trying to get at is that Thriller Bark also introduced us to ancient giants. Luffy even embodied one. If Luffy is the inherited will of JoyBoy and JoyBoy was an ancient giant, then just like in Thriller Bark, Luffy will again be embodying an ancient giant, but on a grander, much more cosmic, inherited will-y scale. Side note, let's not forget about Little Oars Jr., captain of the Little Pirates. He is 60 meters tall. I'm not sure if he's considered a full ancient giant, as I don't know, I thought they were extinct, but he is a descendant of Oars. In fact, his flag indicates that he is the third Oar, so there is another unaccounted for Oars somewhere here. Now that I think of it, I have seen a few people theorize that the Skull Dome, which I am currently arguing may be JoyBoy, is the first Oars. Now, I'm not going to get into that or argue that today, but por qué no los dos? Stuff can be two things. Little Oars Jr., like Luffy, had a sentimental story surrounding a hat made of straw, but this was made in Wano. Now, we could kind of connect this to the giant straw hat in Marijois, which some people theorize to have belonged to JoyBoy and initially sparked the idea that JoyBoy might have been a giant. If this hat did belong to JoyBoy and this skull is also JoyBoy, then his hat too small for his goddamn head, because Skullboy is extra big. He's bigger than even the Oarses by a lot. This could come down to general height variations in the series, as seen in other races such as humans and giants. However, there is another potential explanation as to why he was this particular colossal size. In the scenario that if this this is JoyBoy, he had some kind of power or ability to change his size via devil fruit. Perhaps the secrets of the Gomu Gomu fruit. If JoyBoy also had this fruit, it would not only be further symbolic of Luffy inheriting the will, it would also explain more why the government thought it was so important. It belonged to someone they've tried to erase from history, so they want it under wraps. Perhaps they were planning to lock it away deep in Marijois, much like the Straw Hat. Perhaps JoyBoy used the fruit's powers to make himself even bigger, and he died while in this form, hence extra large skull. But stay with me to lean into this more. JoyBoy soon being revealed to be some kind of giant makes some kind of narrative sense, since Elbaf is coming up and we're likely going to get some answers there. Or more questions, but hopefully some answers. Ancient giants, like regular giants, are likely from Elbaf, as the name Oz comes from Norse mythology, and Elbaf is just as unsubtly Norse as Wano is Japanese. To further connect Kaido and JoyBoy in this case, I have reason to believe that the Oni race are also from Elbaf, or more accurately, the realm of which Elbaf is but one part. As for the kind of country that Elbaf is, and how it's geographically not like anything we've ever seen in One Piece so far, this is something that several other One Piece YouTubers have pointed out. In this one image we've seen of Elbaf's coast, we can see a tiny part of what appears to be a massive tree. In Norse mythology, there is a tree. This tree is Yggdrasil. In Norse mythology, Yggdrasil is the world tree, and it connects the 9 realms. They've got realms for all kinds of things. I'm talking humans, I'm talking giants, I'm talking elves, I'm talking dwarves. In the case a Yggdrasil scenario is what we're working with here, the land known as Elbaf seems to be the equivalent of Midgard, which doesn't quite add up since Midgard is the realm of humans and there is a separate realm for giants. But first and foremost, Midgard was where the Vikings lived, which is what the Elbafian giants essentially are, and then there's a separate realm for giants. And in One Piece, what would a giant consider a giant? Well, an ancient giant. Also, where most of the giants that we're familiar with over the course of the story are basically giant versions of humans, I feel that ancient giants were more an ancient form of Oni, hence the similar characteristics. Also, the helmets of regular giants mimic the horns of ancient giants, so I guess they revere them in some way. Furthermore, Kaido's words to Yamato in an earlier chapter imply that they are not from Wano, but somewhere else. And with Elbaf on the horizon, or rather a potential Yggdrasil, it is worth noting that ogres play an important role in Norse mythology, and the direct translation of an ogre or a demon into Japanese is Oni. So basically, Kaido is Shrek. Please like and subscribe for more theory. This would be a specifically interesting point to follow up should Yamato accompany the crew to Elbaf. Especially since Kaido so strongly implied they were from elsewhere in that one panel, it makes logical sense for that somewhere to be followed up in the future. Yggdrasil also has a realm of the dead, so yeah, that's a thing. Specifically a potentially interesting thing, cause side note time, the name of Onigashima of course comes from the tale of Momotaro, and with Oni meaning demon or ogre, Onigashima means the island of ogres or demons. However, Oni also means a spirit of a deceased person, and it uses the very same kanji for this. So in this sense, Onigashima can also be read as Isle of the Dead, and there is so much death stuff going on right now. We got Brook, we got this guy, we got the Skull Dome, we got the Fire Festival. Also, does the Fire Festival being specifically about spirits of the dead have something to do with all of this? What are the origins of the Fire Festival? What is the reason, Oda?
What does it mean? What does it mean?
I also want to take this opportunity to point out this little detail in the latest anime opening. The skull seems to come alive and move, which has not happened in the manga yet, but neither had this little thing here until just a few weeks ago. To wrap this whole mess up, horn skulls and other such Onigashima/JoyBoy-esque figures have featured fairly prominently in a lot of the color page spreads throughout the series, from the very start, particularly in the early series. In the color page spread of chapter 79, Luffy is wearing a horn skull. It looks a little bit like Onigashima, perhaps early implications of Luffy being JoyBoy. And then in the color page spread of chapter 107, we see this lovely illustration by Usopp. It's looking kind of like an early form of the Skull Dome, but I'm indulging my inner overanalyzer here. I don't want to indulge myself too far though, because if I'm not careful, everything can look like a hint, even when not everything is meant to be. And even if this theory ends up being completely incorrect, well, that's fine. You still win for joining me on this crazy and wild adventure. I have a whole host of other adventures for you to explore, so check those out. I'm Dawn of the World, and I will see you next time. Later, guys.